If you have been glued to the news wires today, Tuesday, February 3rd, 2026, you are probably feeling a severe case of whiplash. I know I am.
Oh, absolutely.
Just 24 hours ago, the whole narrative around the United States and India was, doom, gloom, and trade wars.
It really is a complete rewrite of the script. If you look at where we were and where we are this morning, it's maybe the most significant diplomatic U-turn of the decade.
It's the kind of headline that makes you check the date, right? Make sure it's not April Fool's. Prime Minister Modi and President Trump have just announced this massive trade deal.
And the number is what's really jumping out.
It is. The number that has every economist's jaw on the floor is the tariff reduction. U.S. tariffs on Indian goods are dropping from a suffocating 50% down to 18%.
Which is just massive. I mean, we aren't just talking about a minor adjustment. We're talking about slashing a tax that was effectively decapitating trade between the world's two largest democracies.
It's a reset button.
A huge reset button.
But simply saying 50 to 18 feels a bit abstract.
Yeah.
I think to really get the magnitude of this, for everyone listening, we need to understand the mechanics of it. Why were we at 50% in the first place?
Exactly.
Why is 18% the magic number now? And most importantly, because we know how President Trump operates, what was the price of admission for India?
Right. This isn't charity. This is a transaction, a very large, very complex transaction.
So the mission for this deep dive is to decode this deal. We're going to look at the crisis context, how we got to the brink of a total breakdown back in August 2025.
Then the quid pro quo.
The quid pro quo, specifically that massive energy pivot India just agreed to regarding Russia. And then finally, we'll look at this new tech landscape under the new trust initiative.
And, we have to ask the big question lurking in the background. Is India's famous policy of strategic autonomy officially dead?
Let's start with the bad days. We need to hop in the time machine and set the dial for August 2025. What did that landscape even look like?
It was scorched earth. I mean, truly. To understand why, you have to go back to a phrase that has just haunted this relationship for years.
The tariff king.
The tariff king.
Right.
This was the label President Trump attached to India, and it wasn't just campaign rhetoric. It was a core of his policy grievance. He genuinely saw India's protectionist markets as a sort of personal affront to American business.
The argument was always about reciprocity.
Precisely. We let your goods in with low taxes, but you charge us, 50 or 100% on our motorcycles. It's not fair.
Wow.
So early in 2025, the administration decided to stop complaining and start acting. They imposed a 25% reciprocal tariff.
Okay, so that gets us to 25%. That's painful, but that's kind of standard trade war friction. How do we get to 50? Because 50% sounds less like a tariff and more like a blockade.
That's a great way to put it. That's where the geopolitics collided head-on with the economics. The White House was losing patience with New Delhi's foreign policy.
Specifically with Russia.
Specifically, their continued embrace of the BRICS alliance, and more critically, their reliance on Russian crude oil during the whole Ukraine conflict.
So they used tariffs as a foreign policy weapon.
They absolutely did. In August 2025, the U.S. added a second layer, a 25% punitive tariff. So you had the 25 for trade unfairness, plus another 25 for, geopolitical disobedience, and boom, you hit that staggering 50% figure.
Let's just pause on that for a second. Let's make that real. If I'm an Indian exporter selling, say, apparel to Walmart or machine parts to Ford.
It means that for every dollar of value you ship, the U.S. government takes 50 cents right at the border.
Wow.
And in industries like textiles or gems and jewelry, where your profit margins are maybe 10, 12% on a good day, the 50% tariff isn't a hurdle.
It's a death sentence. It prices you out of the market completely.
Overnight, Indian goods became toxic assets for U.S. buyers. And the Ministry of External Affairs in India was, as you can imagine, furious. They called the move unjustified and unreasonable.
And it spilled onto the streets, too. I remember reading about that. It wasn't just boardroom anger.
No, not at all. We saw calls to boycott American brands, McDonald's, Coca-Cola, Amazon, a real surge of nationalism. And there were these persistent reports, which the Indian government officially denied, that India had quietly frozen U.S. arms purchases in retaliation.
And didn't this all overlap with a military issue? I think it was called Operation Sindoor.
Yes. Operation Sindoor in May 2025. That was an Indian military operation. The real controversy came when the U.S. later claimed that their economic pressure helped force a ceasefire. India absolutely hated that narrative.
It would feel like Washington was holding a gun to their head on national security.
Exactly. So by the time we got to late 2025, trust was effectively at zero.
So that's the context.
Uh-huh.
Standing on the edge of a cliff. Now, fast forward to today. The breakthrough, the punitive 25% is just gone.
Wiped out completely.
And the reciprocal tariff is cut to 18%?
Correct. The blockade is lifted.
I have to play devil's advocate here, though. 18% is still, no, it's still a tariff. It's not zero. Why is the Indian side celebrating this as a win-win?
Because in the current global economy, less bad is the new good. You have to look at the comparative landscape. Who is India competing with to sell, T-shirts and jewelry to America?
Vietnam, Bangladesh, places like that.
Exactly. And Vietnam and Bangladesh, they pay around 20% to enter the U.S. market on similar goods. So at 18%, India suddenly undercuts them slightly. They regain that competitiveness.
But the real target here isn't Vietnam, is it?
No, the real target is China. The dragon in the room, always.
Of course.
Chinese goods are facing U.S. tariffs in the 30 to 35% range. So if you are a U.S. buyer looking for a supply chain that isn't China,
India at 18% looked a lot more attractive than China at 35%.
it's a strategic window. That's the term they're using. It gives Indian exporters a clear price advantage over their biggest geopolitical rival. It positions India as the safe factory for the U.S.
Okay, that makes sense for manufacturing. But the U.S. doesn't just hand out strategic windows. We mentioned the price tag. What did Modi have to give up? Because looking at the reports, the concession here seems massive.
It is. It's energy. And this is the part of the deal that I think historians will be arguing about for years. The sources are confirming that India has agreed to a massive reduction, potentially a total halt of Russian crude oil purchases.
That is a staggering pivot. For years, India's entire stance was, we buy oil from whoever sells it cheapest.
They bought millions of barrels from Russia when everyone else was sanctioning them. They called it strategic autonomy. They defended that right fiercely.
So what changed?
The 50% tariff regime broke that resolve. The math was just brutal. You can save a few dollars per barrel on Russian oil, or you can save your entire export economy from American tariffs. It turned out you can't have both.
And they chose the export economy.
They did. And here's where it gets really interesting for the energy markets. India isn't just stopping Russian oil. They are pivoting that procurement to the U.S. and potentially Venezuela.
Wait, so they're literally swapping Russian oil for American oil?
Essentially, it's a direct transfer of dependency. And that is why this is such a headline grabber. It suggests India is aligning its energy security directly with U.S. foreign policy interests.
That feels like the headline within the headline. It's not just a trade deal, it's an energy alignment.
It is. But let's look at the other side of the ledger. The U.S. isn't just selling oil, they're also getting access for their farmers.
Right. I saw the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins, is calling this an America First victory.
And for good reason. A lot of people don't realize this, but in 2024, the U.S. actually had an agricultural trade deficit with India. We bought $1.3 billion more food from them than they bought from us.
So we were eating their shrimp, but they weren't buying our corn.
Pretty much, yeah. This deal aims to flip that script. India is lowering tariffs, maybe even to zero on specific U.S. items. Tree nuts, cotton, and soybean oil.
I have to stop you there, though, because I know a little bit about Indian politics, and I know that farming is the third rail. You touch it, you die.
It is the most sensitive sector in the entire country, absolutely.
We've seen farmers blockade New Delhi for months over much smaller issues than this. If cheap U.S. cotton and soy start flooding the market, isn't Modi inviting a domestic crisis?
It is an incredibly tight rope for him to walk. You are absolutely right. The manufacturing sector in Mumbai is popping champagne today, but the rural sector in Punjab might be sharpening their pitchforks.
Is there a safeguard? Or is the door just wide open?
The devil will be in the details there. If the imports are limited to things India doesn't produce enough of, like almonds or walnuts, maybe it passes without too much noise.
But if U.S. dairy and poultry get in?
U.S. dairy is heavily subsidized. It's cheap.
Right.
If that hits the Indian market, it could just devastate local livelihoods. That could trigger massive rural distress and protests. So while Washington calls this a win, the implementation in New Delhi is going to be very, very delicate.
So we have energy and agriculture. Let's talk about the third pillar, which sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, tech. The sources keep mentioning a new acronym, trust.
Yes, transforming the relationship, utilizing strategic technology.
Trust. Very subtle branding there.
It's certainly on the nose. But it's important to see what it replaces. Previously, we had ICTT, the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technology.
Okay, so how is trust different from IC8? Or is it just a new logo?
Think of IC as the architectural blueprint. It was a lot of meetings, policy papers, handshakes. Trust is the construction crew. It's operational. It's about building things.
Okay, give me a concrete example. What does trust actually build?
Data centers and AI infrastructure. The new Indian Union budget is rolling out tax holidays for foreign companies building data centers. That is a direct financial invitation to U.S. tech giants.
Google, Microsoft, Amazon.
All of them. It's basically saying, come build your cloud in our backyard and we won't tax you.
And in return?
In return, the U.S. helps build the AI infrastructure in India. The strategic goal here is that term we keep hearing, friendshoring.
Right, friendshoring. Can you break that down simply for us?
Sure. It just means moving your supply chain to a country that won't turn off the tap if a war starts. The U.S. knows it can't make everything at home, but it can't rely on China anymore, so they want India to be the new hub.
For things like critical minerals, lithium, rare earths.
Exactly. But there's a catch. There is always a catch with tech transfer. The condition for this friendshoring is that India must align with U.S. tech standards.
Meaning no Huawei gear in the 6G networks.
No Huawei. No Chinese software in the AI stack. The 18% tariff cut is the carrot to lure India into the U.S. tech ecosystem and away from China's.
They've actually given this whole thing a name, have they? Mission 500.
Mission 500, yeah. It's the goal to hit $500 billion in bilateral trade by 2030.
You know, listening to you explain this, oil for tariffs, tech access for alignment, it sounds very cold. It doesn't sound like two great democracies holding hands. It sounds like a business merger.
That is the key insight. This is transactional diplomacy. The sources really highlight this shift. The era of vague speeches about shared democratic values is, for now, effectively over. This is a contract.
It's explicit. You want the tariffs lowered. Stop buying Russian oil. You want the tech. Buy our weapons.
It is, and that carries risks. When a relationship is purely transactional, loyalty only lasts as long as the deal is profitable. What happens if a better deal comes along?
Which brings us back to China. How does Beijing react to seeing India effectively sign up as the U.S.'s junior economic partner?
They won't be happy. And they have leverage. India's pharmaceutical industry, which is huge, still relies heavily on China for APIs.
APIs being?
Active pharmaceutical ingredients, the raw chemicals you need to make drugs. India makes the pills, but China makes the chemicals. If Beijing decides to retaliate, they could squeeze India's supply chains hard.
So India is pivoting to the U.S. to escape U.S. tariffs. But in doing so, they might be walking right into Chinese economic retaliation.
Precisely. It's a calculated risk. India is betting that the U.S. market is more valuable in the long run than Chinese goodwill.
And it's not just China. The U.S. is keeping India on a short leash on other things too, right? I saw a note about the Chabahar port.
That's a perfect example of how fragile this truce is. Chabahar is a port in Iran that India operates. For years, the U.S. kind of looked the other way, but recently, the U.S. revoked the sanctions waivers.
Meaning India could be sanctioned for operating it.
Right. Now, in this new deal, India managed to negotiate a temporary exception. But listen to the timeline. The exception only lasts until April 2026.
Wait, that's literally 2 months from now?
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
the U.S. saying, we have a deal today, but we're checking your homework in 60 days. It keeps India in a state of constant compliance. It's not a permanent pass.
This really all circles back to that concept you mentioned earlier, strategic autonomy. For decades, India prided itself on not picking sides.
It's hard to claim you don't pick sides when your energy grid runs on American oil, your cloud runs on American servers, and your farmers are competing with American corn.
It feels like the end of an era.
I think we are witnessing the shift from strategic autonomy to strategic alignment. Economic reality just forced India's hand. They needed the U.S. market to grow, and the U.S. used that leverage, the 50% tariff, to pull them firmly into its orbit.
It's a high-stakes gamble.
It is. But if you look at the upside, if Mission 500 works, India becomes a manufacturing superpower, displacing China in key sectors. The U.S. gains a massive market and a reliable partner in Asia.
Both sides have decided the compromise is worth it.
For now.
So, bottom line for you listening, we've gone from a 50% tariff trade war to an 18% strategic window in just 6 months. It's been a roller coaster. What should we be watching next?
Two things. First, the price of oil. If global prices spike, India's decision to drop cheap Russian crude is going to hurt the average voter. That hits inflation.
10 seconds.
The Indian farmers watch the rural belts.
If the tractors start blocking the highways in Delhi.
Then this whole deal could unravel from the inside out. Domestic politics always, always has the final vote.
A high-stakes gamble with 1.4 billion people involved.
Yeah,
We will be watching closely. Thanks for breaking all this down with us.
my pleasure.
And to you listening, here's a thought to take with you. If trade policy is now just foreign policy in disguise, how permanent is this 18% truce? With U.S. elections always around the corner and political winds always shifting, could the tariff king rhetoric return if the trade deficit doesn't drop fast enough? It's food for thought. We'll see you on the next Deep Dive.